want to welcome everybody and thank you for joining us tonight. For those who have joined previous Canadian Psoriasis Network webinars, welcome back. For those of you who are new, my name is Antonella Scally. I'm the Executive Director with the Canadian Psoriasis Network, and I'm really excited to get us started on our session tonight on drug coverage and advocacy. How do medications reach your medicine cabinet in Canada? So next slide, please. Just wanted to start so that everybody's on the same page with some basic housekeeping on Zoom. For those of you who would prefer to listen in French, there is a little interpretation button, a little globe at the bottom of the screen. You can toggle that to select French, and we have our great interpreter, Ciro, live interpreting throughout the session. And just a reminder, again, the webinar is being recorded in both languages so that we can post this on our website for viewing afterwards. So that's on cpn-rcp.com. And all participants are going to be in listen-only mode because we're recording, so we just want to minimize noise. So again, if you have any questions, it says the chat box, but just because there's a tech glitch, please pop them into the Q&A, and I'll be moderating those throughout the evening, and there will be an opportunity for Q&A at the end. So we can hopefully get to as many questions as we can, and we'll save those for the end. As with all of our webinars and resources, just a reminder that the information that our speakers are going to be sharing tonight is general. So we really, if you have any specific questions or concerns, we invite you to follow up with us afterwards. And same with the Q&A. They'll be able to answer general questions, but because individual situations are so unique and circumstances can be so specific, we'll really be focusing on answering questions from a very general perspective. And I want to do a quick thank you to our sponsors for tonight's events, Janssen and BMS, for their unrestricted support for this webinar. And I do see that people are popping in their locations, and it's amazing because we're getting people from BC, Ontario, like me, and Newfoundland and Labrador. So we're kind of reaching across the country, and I'm sure there are many more of you from different places. So welcome, and thank you so much for joining us. Next slide, please. So the Canadian Psoriasis Network, just for those of you who might not know us, we're a national not-for-profit led by a board of directors that consists primarily of people who live with severe forms of psoriasis and psoriatic arthritis. And our goals are really to provide education, resources, support, and advocacy to advance the needs of people with psoriatic disease, so psoriasis and psoriatic arthritis in Canada. So if you haven't checked us out already, we're on all of the major social media platforms. Our website is on the screen. I encourage you to check us out because we do have some great past webinars on our site, as well as some great resources and information, some of which we'll be touching on throughout tonight's presentation. We also encourage you to sign up with us. We send out regular communications to keep you posted about psoriatic disease in Canada and new information that might be important to you. And we also provide information about events like these ones and other opportunities to become involved, including, we'll be talking a lot about advocacy tonight, so including in a lot of our advocacy initiatives. So if this is of interest, we encourage you to continue to follow us and check us out. So I will be just giving you some brief information about the presentation tonight before I turn it over to our amazing speakers. So just to set the context, when we survey our community, one of the topics that we regularly hear as a priority is information about treatments for psoriasis and psoriatic arthritis. It's typically the top topic that people want to learn about and hear about, probably because the landscape is changing a lot, and of course it's a common concern for people who live with a chronic disease, is treatment. So for this reason, we have been holding annual webinars on the treatment landscape and how it's evolving in Canada, and we did our last one in fall with Dr. Michael Corbo. So if you haven't seen that and you're interested in it, you can check that out on our website. Again, it's on the screen. And so this time around, not surprisingly, one of the other big topics that comes up is that we regularly hear is important to people is advocacy for improved access to care and to treatments and to supports for psoriatic disease, because we know that living with these conditions can present a lot of challenges for people, and we strongly believe that having access to timely, affordable, effective, safe treatments shouldn't be one of those challenges if that's what's right for you and in discussion with your healthcare provider. So as many of you know, the treatment accessing prescription drugs in Canada can be a bit of a challenge to navigate. So there's multiple different public drug plans, innumerable private drug plans, all of which have different criteria, different ways of accessing, and they intersect in different ways. A lot of this you'll hear tonight from our presenters. So we really thought that this would be our first kind of session to do a 101 on how do medications actually end up in our hands and how do people actually access them here in Canada. So that's from processes involved in drug reviews, approvals, and negotiations to the different ways that people get their prescriptions filled. And we're also going to be talking importantly on some key aspects of advocacy that CPN is involved in with the input and support of our community, so people like yourselves, and the ways that individuals can consider advocating for your own needs. So as I mentioned, we'll have Q&A at the end. So please do save your questions or type your questions in as we go, and we'll save them for our presenters at the end. And I just want to mention, this is a huge topic, and we are just we're touching on the surface of a lot of these different topics. So we're sending out an evaluation after the session. If there's an area that you'd like more information on or want us to deep dive in on a future session, please let us know, because we take that feedback and consider it in planning for our future webinars. So that's the event and CPN in a nutshell. I'm very excited to turn it over to our amazing speakers. So I'm going to just introduce them briefly and then turn it over to them. I'll start with Wendy Gerhart. Wendy is a senior stakeholder engagement leader with a demonstrated ability to build and sustain collaborations. She brings more than 25 years of corporate and not-for-profit management experience and takes pride in designing, developing, and implementing community mobilization and stakeholder relations. Wendy strives to take an innovative approach to advocating to improve health outcomes. She's passionate about her work with groups like the Canadian Psoriasis Network, and we're really grateful to have your expertise here today, Wendy. And our other esteemed speaker is Rachael Manion. Rachael is the Executive Director of the Canadian Skin Patient Alliance, of which CPN is a proud affiliate member. Drawing on her background as a lawyer and consultant, Rachael brings a strategic and creative approach to advocating for better patient care. She's also chair of the Patient Advisory Council of the Skin Investigation Network of Canada, so Skin Canada. So a lot of really great knowledge and experience from our speakers tonight. So thank you for being with us. I turn it over to you, Wendy, to get us going, and thank everyone again for joining us.
Great. Thanks a lot, Antonella. Just really want to commend the Canadian Psoriasis Network on hosting a webinar of this topic. I know in other disease areas, this is a really important interest area for patients. And I think we want to really make sure that our patient communities really understand the processes that needs to happen and how to advocate both systemically and individually to help move progress with changing policy and improving health outcomes. So really appreciate CPN for hosting this event tonight. So tonight we're going to cover an overview of the processes. Who are the stakeholders? Patient input, what is it? What does it mean? Self-advocacy, and then we'll jump into a Q&A. So I'm going to I'm going to walk through the next few slides myself, and then I'm going to hand it over to Rachael, who is an amazing speaker. She'll wow you, and she's going to talk a little bit about advocacy and a few other things. And then, as Antonella mentioned earlier, please, if you have questions as you come along, just pop them into the Q&A. Next slide. Okay, so how do we access medications in Canada? So there are really three primary ways to access medications in Canada. It's through the public programs, private insurance, and out of pocket, which means you pay for it. When we refer to the public access, this means where the provincial governments provide product through their formulary/drug benefit programs. Public programs are paid for and administered by the provincial and territorial governments. Most plans cover medicines and vaccines for eligible groups, including seniors, recipients of social assistance, and individuals with conditions that are associated with high drug costs. Many public plans also have programs to cover the cost of certain types of medications in certain health conditions. So like people with diabetes or cancer might get different types of coverage. Private insurance is covered by an employer. So if your employer offers benefits, they will cover benefits to cover medications. It's mostly large to medium-sized employers who offer benefits of varying degrees. And navigating the private payers is equally as complicated as the public system. And we are, this could be a completely separate webinar in of itself. And that might be something that you feed it back to CPN and we cover off later in the year. The third and least ideal option is where you don't qualify for public access. You don't have private insurance and you're kind of on the hook for paying out of pocket. I've added in the green two other ways to access medications, and that's through the public support programs that are that are owned and operated by the manufacturers. These are not programs that will provide free product in most part. They're more of a bridging system to get you access to medication until your private insurance is approved, and or if you're not eligible through private insurance or public insurance, they could offer you like a 20% financial support just through their PSP, their patient support program. And then I just wanted to highlight and kind of call out that there are other patient support programs through the provinces. For example, like Trillium is in Ontario, where it is a catastrophic drug plan that's available to help reduce costs for anybody with high drug costs who can't afford it. And every province kind of has its own thing. So again, kind of a deeper dive for another webinar, but it's something that you could look into in the province that you reside in. So next slide. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of an overview of what private and public reimbursement coverage looks like in Canada. This slide is a little bit outdated, but overall the percentages are fairly accurate. So if you look to the overall percentage of Canadians who have access to either public or private, most do. Like we're pretty well covered, 98%. Of that, 62-ish% have private coverage insurance, and this can fluctuate between disease areas, but on average between 62 and 70% have private drug coverage through employers. And then alternatively, like 26% have public or are eligible for public drug coverage through the various systems. And these mostly include people over the age of 65 or that are on some sort of social assistance. And then others fall into that other program, which I just talked about, which is sort of the patient support, like Trillium in Ontario. And I know there's ones right across the country. And there are 10% who are eligible for coverage, but are not enrolled, meaning that these people could have access, but have not gone through the process for eligibility. So these could include people who are either like undiagnosed, or could be like self-employed but not earning, but earning too much money. And then the last is like 1.8, so close to 2% of Canadians who are not eligible at all for coverage through the public programs or private, are people who are more than likely just self-employed. So that's kind of the lay of the land for how reimbursement sort of looks like in Canada in whole. Next slide. Okay, so jumping right into sort of what the process looks like in Canada, and I'm just being cognizant of my time. So we're going to dive now into the drug approval process in Canada. So manufacturers need to go through a very lengthy research and development process that includes discovery, preclinical phase, and then 3 phases of clinical trials. It sounds pretty simple, but it's not. It's very complex. From a drug discovery to your medicine cabinet, it takes about 10 to 15 years and millions of dollars, even billions of dollars into research and development spending to create an innovative medicine. The entire process of completing all 3 phases of research takes thousands of volunteers, patients who participate in the clinical trials, scientists, doctors, and also researchers. And there's no guarantees of success. So when a clinical trial doesn't show promise, researchers either go back to the drawing board or they abandon the trial completely. And we're not going to go into any more detail about that because we can hold another webinar on this topic if it's of interest. Next slide. So as I just mentioned, Canada's reimbursement process system is complex and challenging. It delays access and it impacts price. So as I just mentioned, the drug reimbursement system in Canada is very complex with 19 distinct public drug programs. This includes federal, provincial, territorial drug plans, and over 40 private insurers, private insurance carriers that each have their own formulary, drug formularies. The process that I'm going to go through in this slide takes about 2 to 2.5 years if we're lucky from NOC. It could be shorter, it could be longer, but given the current environment, we're seeing, a bit of a theme to the longer end of things. So I'm going to start very quickly, and again, the reimbursement system could be a webinar in itself. So I'm going to kind of go over this very high level. And I hope we'll circulate a few PDFs tomorrow to kind of pull this all back in for you, but really going very high level. I just want to start off by saying we talk a lot in acronyms in our world. So I just want to highlight that CADTH, when I say CADTH, it is the Canadian Agency for Drugs and Technologies in Health Assessment. PCPA is the Pan-Canadian Pharmaceutical Alliance, and it is an office that is located in Toronto, and it brings together, it acts on behalf of the provinces across Canada. And INES is and I apologize for anybody French on the line, but it's the Institut National de l'Excellence de Santé et Services Sociaux. So it is the kind of equal counterpart of CADTH, but in Quebec. So very quickly, like I said, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail. So CADTH and INES independently review the product from a clinical economic effectiveness perspective, also known as the health technology assessment. And PCPA offices negotiates price on behalf of the provinces opting into the negotiation. For public reimbursement purposes, the first steps of the review is at CADTH and NS, and they both review the drug submitted as it compares to existing treatment options from clinical and cost-effective perspectives. So CADTH and NS submissions are for products that the manufacturers want to secure public coverage. Sometimes a manufacturer will choose, based on internal decisions, whether or not they want to secure public reimbursement and to only have the and some may choose to only have the product really available through private insurers. So if a manufacturer chooses to go down the CADTH and PCPA and NS route, they really want to secure public reimbursement for their product. And so what happens is the manufacturer submits to CADTH and NS each separately. And then there is generally a back and forth leading to recommendations, and there's lots of stuff happening in between. But it's during this time, early in the process, that patient groups like CPN can provide input. After all the back and forth is done, hopefully the file is closed with a positive recommendation. It could be a negative recommendation, but we all cross our fingers that it's positive. And then at that point, for the next step to happen is when the PCPA negotiations happen. So once it goes into PCPA negotiations, sorry, my notes are a little off here. That's when the provinces come together and they decide whether they're going to opt into being a part of that negotiation or not. So for example, the negotiations could, the letter of intent, or sorry, the opening of the negotiations could come about, and there could be two provinces, and I'm just making this up randomly, that opt out of the negotiations. So then those negotiations are happening on behalf of 8 provinces versus 10 provinces. And so the negotiations go back and forth, and then once both parties agree on a price, then a letter of intent is issued, and then that makes it kind of makes the product eligible for provincial listings. So if there is no letter of intent concluded, it makes it really difficult for the provinces to move forward, or the manufacturer to move forward with listing the product on the provincial formulary. So this is a really critical piece in reimbursement that needs to be achieved, is that letter of intent from the PCPA negotiations. And I think I mentioned that not all provinces are mandatory to opt in. If a province does not opt in, it likely means less opportunity for the manufacturer to negotiate pricing. It doesn't mean it's like absolutely not going to happen. It just makes it less likely. And then we go down to negotiations with the provinces. So once the letter of intent is issued, it goes into individual provincial negotiations. And the same happens kind of with NS on the other side. So once they have issued a recommendation, then their provincial formulary will choose to list or not list. And then on the private payer side, so like we talked about, it's not mandatory that manufacturers seek reimbursement following an NOC. So manufacturers may decide to hold off or delay submitting for public reimbursement, and they may just go straight into the private sector. And they can do this for many reasons, like just the type of medication it is, holding off on looking what the environment looks like. But on the private payer side, once a product receives NOC, usually the manufacturer is very quick to start negotiations with insurers. And we see this timeline a little bit shorter, although it is becoming a little bit more complicated with all the changes in the environmental system. But we do see private insurers listing quicker than the public reimbursement system. And we can get into timelines later if anybody's interested in the Q&A. So next slide. And so I just wanted to really quickly go over sort of the path to public and payer access and patient input. So for the majority of products, Health Canada does not engage with patient organizations, although if it's a first in class, it has been known that Health Canada will meet with with a patient organization, but this is not like a common standard of practice where they'll engage. Organizations like CPN have the opportunity to provide formal input at the CADTH, INESS, and BC formal input structures. And BC is really the only province right now that has a formal input process. For patient input at CADTH, INESS, and BC, what happens is a window of opportunity is announced when submissions will be accepted. And that's when you'll see call outs. And we're going to go through this a couple times when you'll see from this Canadian Psoriasis Network, sort of like, we're looking for your input on a medication, or just on like kind of burden of illness, quality of life that you're experiencing living with this illness. And each institution has similar but different sets of questions that they look feedback on. And then, as I mentioned, like I said, you'll when CADTH and INESS have their windows open, that's when you're going to see an email coming out from Antonella saying, hey, we're looking for feedback on either medication experience and or just input on how living with psoriasis or psoriatic arthritis impacts your life, that kind of thing. And then I just very quickly, PCPA, you'll notice that there's no formal input process, but they are a office an institution that is open and willing to meet with organizations like the CPN on an as needed basis. And, you know, again, just emphasizing the overarching timeframe that it takes to get through this process is approximately like 2.5 years, maybe a little bit less, and sometimes more. And I just want to highlight that, you know, there are lots of opportunities for informal outreach through the provinces, through PCPA, through your local elected officials, for input on, you know, how living with psoriasis and psoriatic arthritis impacts your day-to-day living. Next slide. And so I just want to quickly kind of overview before I give it over to Rachel to talk about what is patient input. So it's really, again, just reiterating the opportunity for registered organizations to submit information relevant to impact on quality of life, burden of life, experience on medications, and it really provides the organization an opportunity to kind of bundle all the input up into a submission to feed it back into you know, CADTH or INESS, who are making decisions on whether this medication will really make a big difference in people's lives and the value of it. The value is a huge word. So I encourage you to, every time you see a call to action to answer a survey, to take the time to do that. And I'm going to guess the next slide is probably going to roll it over to Rachel. Thank you.
Wendy, that's great. So I really appreciate you walking everybody through how complex, and you use the word on the slide there, how complex all of these processes are. This is something that that patient groups like Canadian Psoriasis Network, Canadian Skin Patient Alliance, and others spend a lot of our day-to-day time working on to make sure that during those critical moments that Wendy identified, patients' perspectives are shared. They're shared as particularly and as broadly as we can, so that they are in decision makers' minds when they're going about answering the questions that they have to answer in the course of their day. And access to medications is, of course, a very pressing issue. As a skin patient, there are a whole panoply of what we term rights at the Canadian Skin Patient Alliance. These are the elements that we feel should be in place in order for skin patients to lead healthy and fulfilling lives. And you'll notice on your screen now, this is actually an image of our Skin Patient Charter of Rights, which came out a couple of years ago. And they're, accessing treatments and being actively engaged in those discussions as the ultimate decision maker. That's all on that's one of the rights that's included here. So when we talk about rights, we don't necessarily mean legal rights, although some of these do overlap nicely with your legal entitlements as a patient. What we're talking about is ways that skin patient organizations like CPN and like CSPA, that we can help support patients to make sure that everybody has access to what they need to have access to in order to have that healthy and fulfilling life. So we're kind of pivoting now from talking about systemic advocacy, advocacy to change systems, advocacy to make sure that the future for skin patients and for psoriatic disease patients is brighter than the present day. And one of the things that I'm really looking forward to speaking with you about tonight is about advocacy. It's thinking about where we can do that. So Wendy mentioned some really specific moments in the process that medications follow to get from the lab and the regulator all the way down to the patients. And we know from the work that we've done both at the CSPA and the work that we've been supporting Canadian Psoriasis Network to do, that advocacy is actually quite broad. And so sometimes, we're talking about what's happening at the government level, which Wendy was describing. Sometimes we're talking about raising awareness with employers, in the workplace, in schools. Sometimes we're talking about raising a little bit more awareness, and we can kind of call it that when we're talking to our healthcare professionals, when we're making sure that they really understand what's going on for us, so that we can come up with a plan that works best for us and that answers the questions that we have. And we know if this plan doesn't work, we have a plan B. That's one of those things that can be really important for our mental health, is to know that we're not always at the end of the line there. So depending on where you're doing that kind of advocacy, how you do it, how you approach it, what you're talking about, how you're getting ready, all that stuff can look really different. So sometimes, and in particular with the work that Wendy was describing, that a lot of patient organizations are involved in, when we're talking about advocacy to improve access to treatment options, sometimes we find it really effective to work in partnerships or in collaboration with other organizations. Sometimes we really want to raise awareness at the public level so that people understand a little bit better what it means to live with psoriatic disease. I myself live with psoriatic disease, so I'm speaking not just from professional expertise, but also from experience. There are, as I mentioned, there are all kinds of different places where we can do advocacy, and you'll see that on the left hand of the screen. And sometimes this is where advocacy can really morph in and bleed into awareness raising and sort of educating our loved ones about what's going on for us. Sometimes we have to help people understand in order for them to be able to share our perspective and understand what needs to change. So that can look really different depending on whether you're doing with government or healthcare providers, employers, private insurance providers, or with your loved ones, with your family and friends. We have, of course, really robust patient associations that work in this space, including Canadian Psoriasis Network. And we also have pretty good working relationships with the Canadian Dermatology Association. So that's the healthcare association for dermatologists. So they're a great connector to bring when we want to have conversations about moving the needle on issues. And we want to be able to bring patient perspectives along with clinical perspectives to really help decision makers and policymakers understand what needs to change, why it needs to change, and how we suggest it change. And this can, of course, be on a variety of different issues. We've talked a little bit about access to treatment options, access to care. That's another one where those kinds of collaborations between patients and healthcare providers can really work well, where we want to talk about referrals or accommodations in the workplace. We want to advocate for second opinions. Maybe we're not super convinced that the way that the healthcare provider that we're speaking with is picturing what's going on for us, or is talking to us about what's going on for us, or where they've landed in their own professional decision making and in presenting a treatment plan for us. We want a second opinion. We want to kind of just check that against somebody else's professional expertise. Stigma, you may have caught, there was a lot of very tiny writing on the skin patient charter that we showed you on the screen. Stigma is one of the big overarching issues that confronts a lot of skin patients. There's a perception that it's just a rash. There's a perception that it's just cosmetic. It's not going to kill you. There's all kinds of values that get loaded in that stigma, and that can both internally and externally start to shape the kinds of treatment options and care options that you are presented with. So these are all different kinds of issues that we advocate on. We want to dig in just a little bit to effectively engaging with healthcare professionals, whether that's your dermatologist, rheumatologist, your GP, your nurse, your pharmacist. You know, we're thinking a bit broadly here, but you'll see a lot of the examples really come up in the context of being prescribed something. So we want to make sure when we feel like we might need to advocate with the healthcare professional that we're going to speak with, that we want to get ready. We want to get ready for that. Some of that is psychological. We want to sort of have that feel psychologically ready. Some of it is a bit emotional. We want to kind of like think about how we might react or respond in a scenario, because these things can be really triggering. That's a really normal human experience. So to get ready, you know, you want to make sure you have that key information in front of you. You want to make sure you're able to describe and not forget some of your symptoms. And you want to make sure that you're able to say how that may have changed over time, or is it a brand new issue? Is it way worse than it used to be? And what you may have tried. We know in psoriasis specifically, there is like a panoply of treatment options. And often people who live with psoriasis will have been prescribed a number of different topicals. Sometimes they work for you, which is great, and sometimes they don't work for you. So making sure that you have sort of access to what those were, or if you have them all at home. Lots of times people in our community will joke about pulling open that drawer and seeing all those topicals that didn't work. You could also lay them out and just take a quick snapshot with your phone. You don't have to you don't have to go to a whole lot of trouble, but you just kind of want to have a reference. So if they say, you know, I want to put you on this topical corticosteroid, you can say, oh, I've tried that, and I've tried it in this formulation, and I tried it on this bit, and I tried it on that bit, and it wasn't successful for me. So that just kind of helps you well, first of all, it can help the healthcare provider have a bit more sense of your own medical history if they don't have all that information in front of you. If you're newly referred to someone, for example, they may not have all that in front of them. Sometimes, you'll have tried where you'd be like, this bottle in this picture made things so much worse. And I don't know why, but please don't prescribe that for me. And you can have a bit more of an in-depth discussion then. It's also important to remember that it's not just prescription medication. So if you're taking supplements and if you're taking herbal remedies, if you're seeing a traditional Chinese medicine practitioner, you kind of want to just make sure that you have that at your fingertips. Now, if you do that and you're having your conversation and it doesn't resonate for you, you don't feel like you landed in a place that makes sense, it's okay to ask for a referral, or once you leave that office, to ask to be referred by your GP to somebody else. You do have to contend often with wait time, so that's not a walk in the park, but it's okay to do that. Sometimes you just need to hear that. It's okay. It's okay to want to check that out with somebody else. Everybody has their own perspectives, and sometimes I've had success where I hit it off with a dermatologist and they know what I'm talking about and they're ready to help me and the treatment plan makes sense. And I've also had the opposite experience, and I'm sure many people out there are in the same boats. So if you're nervous, I just want to echo, if you're nervous, it's okay to go back to your family doc, your nurse practitioner, or whomever made that referral to a specialist in the first place, and just say, it didn't fit right. You don't feel like you were hurt, or whatever it was that didn't work for you. It's okay to express that. And if you're having difficulty with that, don't ever hesitate to reach out to patient organizations. Sometimes we can help you articulate that, or we can just have a quick chat and make sure that you're feeling confident in approaching that topic. I also want to let you know that there are new resources coming from the Canadian Skin Patient Alliance. We are building what we are terming a self-empowerment toolkit that will touch on these various issues that you see on the screen. We have one piece out now, which is how to talk to children and youth about your skin condition. And it's excellent. It's written by a social worker. And I highly recommend that you check it out on the canadianskin.ca website. Coming up are two resources that you'll see at the top of the screen here. One is advice for people who have a new diagnosis of a skin condition. And the other one is a guide for having a dermatology appointment. So getting ready for the appointment, being in the appointment, following up on the appointment, and that kind of thing to kind of give you some building blocks if that's something that you are a little nervous about, or you want some more information on. Now, from time to time, I think most of us have been there, where our claims to our insurance providers get denied. So we wanted to walk you through a couple little tips and tricks on that. And I'm going to do that pretty briefly. So sometimes, we're insured, but the drug is not covered. And sometimes it's been rejected and we don't really understand why. So I'm going to talk very briefly about both scenarios. Wendy pointed out earlier on in the evening that there are many different drug plans, either private drug plans or public drug plans. There's about 100 different variations of public drug plans in this country. There's about 100,000 different variations that make up the private plan space. So it's not uncommon for, well, first of all, for a drug to not be on a formulary. And that's a lot of the work that Wendy was describing, and a lot of the work that patient organizations like CPN do to try and make sure that things are available for patients on formularies. And sometimes it will be on the formulary, but not in the specific way that they that you either you have been prescribed it, or they won't understand that you have met the criteria to have access to that. And that kind of goes back to why that patient input is so important, because increasingly drugs are being added to formularies, and there's several criteria that have to be met before they can be available to a patient. So it's not enough to just have the drug listed on the formulary, it's how it's listed and what a patient needs, what criteria a patient needs to meet in order to have access to that. So there are some tips and tricks, and we're going to be sending these out, I believe tomorrow in PDF form so that you have them handy. Now you'll see on the slide here, one thing I wanted to touch on, it's open to you if this is a private plan that you have through work. It's open to you to talk to your human resources manager about that. We are not saying that you have to disclose your condition. And if you don't want to, that is a-okay. You can always reach out to CPN and have a conversation with Antonella, for example, about what's going on for you. And CPN can either help you, give you some guidance as to how to explore your options, or take that information internally and use it to inform its broader advocacy in this space. Because you know there's lots for us to be doing. Sometimes you can apply for interim coverage, and that's something that you can sort of, it will really depend on your own individual circumstances. There is some information that CPN has put out through the Working It Out project that is available. There's a link on the slide, but I'm actually going to tell you it is available at workingitout.ca. And in there, you'll find a guide to workplace accommodation. That's things like how to talk about your health condition, when you might want to, when you might not want to at work. So there's some guidance there for you. And, you know, if your claim is rejected by the provincial or the private drug program, you can always go in, like, the most important thing is to understand why it was rejected. Sometimes they'll feel like there was criteria that you didn't meet. Sometimes the drug will be listed, but it will be listed for a different condition. That's what we call having something prescribed off-label. And so if you need that piece of information or pieces of information to figure out if there's been a misunderstanding, maybe you did meet the criteria and they just didn't have the right evidence in front of them that you had met it, or to figure out if there's another pathway that you need to follow to get that coverage for you. Again, this will be sent out by Canadian Psoriasis Network tomorrow, so you have more access to that. When I mentioned the idea that there are some drugs where a patient has to meet a whole bunch of criteria, and many psoriasis drugs are like this, we call that prior authorization. So that means that the drug plan has to grant prior authorization to you filling it at the pharmacy. So they have to okay it before you go and pick it up. It's different from many drugs where you can go to the pharmacy, you give them your prescription, and they will process it, and it'll just automatically be covered. It's because it's on your formulary and the whole system is in place. Prior authorization is like an extra step that has to happen before. Now, tomorrow afternoon, we're launching, the Canadian Skin Patient Alliance has been involved in a new initiative called Simplified Prior Authorization. We're launching a new website tomorrow. I think it's called simplifiedpriorauth.ca. And there'll also be a webinar all afternoon if you guys are really interested in the intricacies of private plan coverage and prior authorization, what's going on, what's changing. We're going to be doing that tomorrow. But on this website, you can see right at the top there, news and IMA. There's a drop down there for patients and patient groups, and that has a whole bunch of information all about when this is the case, what you do if your claim has been denied, and all of these various kinds of tips and tricks. So that'll be out tomorrow. You guys getting a little bit of a sneak peek tonight. So heads up on that. And I really know that we're hitting the end of our time. So I want to pass it over to Antonella to tell you a little bit more about how the Canadian Psoriasis Network is involved in these issues.
Thank you so very much, Rachel. And Wendy, as we mentioned at the beginning, there's a ton of information and a lot of process involved from the point of, or to the point of getting your actual prescription filled. So thank you so much for walking us through a lot of that. So Canadian Psoriasis Network, very quickly, because I want to make sure we have time for questions. We meet with some key stakeholders that you can see on the slide. So ministries of health, provincial drug plan manager, other ministries and elected representatives that have are stakeholders in the treatments and care that we advocate for and supports that we advocate for. Rachael mentioned our Working It Out campaign. I'm not sure if you can see the information on the chat, but we're going to send this out in the resources we send out, like the campaign link, www.workingitout.ca, which shows some of the work that we're doing to build awareness about psoriatic disease with employers, also insurers. And I would say that we really try to insert our voice and the voice of the psoriatic disease community and the experiences that we learn about through the community with everywhere that we can to advance some of the needs and the priorities and to decrease some of the challenges that people have currently with access to various resources that they need. And what's our messaging? So we're always educating on psoriatic disease. This is a chronic disease. This is people's needs will change. Their medication needs will change. Their broader supports, things like devices, and mental health supports and other resources will evolve throughout the course of their condition. We talk about, as was mentioned earlier, the impacts on quality of life. And we just did a survey, and thanks to those of you who may have filled it out, that found that over about 63% of participants said that their diagnosis had a negative impact on their quality of life. We also talk about the need for equitable access to effective, tolerable, and safe medications. Tonight's presentation is on medications, but again, our messaging is really about how do we support the needs of the whole person, and treatment is a huge component of that for many people who live with this condition. And of course, improved care. So again, I just want to encourage you to join us, follow us, however you'd like to stay in touch with us, because your voice really matters and it really helps us to share feedback with various stakeholders across the healthcare and other systems that impact on you. And so next slide, please, Rachael. I just want to mention very quickly, so some of the opportunities to become involved and some of the resources that I want to mention. Wendy talked about the opportunities for contributing to our surveys. So we welcome you to please share your feedback that way, because then we can inform some of these review processes for new drugs and other consultations that are happening. Again, we work very closely with our broader patient community, like the CSPA, to ensure the voice of psoriasis patients and skin patients are included in these important public opportunities for input. And we also there's been a couple of questions in the chat about specific treatments. So I want to just say two quick things to that. Everybody's experiences are different. So how one person responds to specific treatments can vary and it can change over time. What I can share is that we do have a webinar on our website, like I mentioned earlier, that looks at the current treatment landscape for psoriasis. So if you're interested in just understanding what new treatments are out there, I encourage you to check that webinar out. You can find it on cpn-rcp.com under webinars. And we also have an entire section where whenever Health Canada issues a notice of compliance that basically says the drug is safe and effective based on what it's said to be, we add it there. So for any psoriasis or psoriatic arthritis drug that receives this notice of compliance for Health Canada, we add it there so that people can kind of be aware of what treatments are there. So again, for the couple of questions about treatments specific to you in the Q&A, I encourage you to check out those resources. We have a treatment decision guide because again, treatment decisions can change over time. So some of the great input that Rachael shared about how to work with your doctor and questions that you might want to consider and information you might want to share can be found in there. And I mentioned our Working It Out project, which really talks a lot about the employer role and private player role. And I just want to mention CSPA has a great resource called Is My Prescription Covered? And it's an interactive tool, thumbs up, that you can answer specific questions that will guide you eventually to whether a public plan in your location, so your province or territory, actually includes the specific drug that you're looking at, or it leads you to the page of your province or territory that can help you determine if your prescription is actually covered in that province by a public plan. So I encourage you to check that out if you have any need for that. So I think the next slide is probably Q&A. We just go to the next slide. Perfect. So yeah, so just encourage you again to check us out for more information. But I do want to, we have a couple of questions that if we have, since we have a minute, I will pose it to the group. Oh, so Rachel's already answered some questions. So I'm not sure who can see what here. So just very quickly, the question is about why some meds that have been approved by Health Canada and have a DIN number are not even registered as a drug that exists by employer private insurance. So Pacific Blue Cross in this case, they tell me they have no knowledge of the drug or the DIN. And so Rachel, you posed an answer.
I'm sorry, I was worried we were running out of time, and I wanted to make sure that that Karen had an answer, a response to her question.
Yes.
You want me to go through
very quickly if you just want to mention it, just in case people aren't able to see that.
So I don't know if this has already been burned into your brain, this slide here, but this is exactly what Wendy was describing. So Karen, the drug that you're describing has been through the green stage, right at the top. And then since that point, it's going to go over to private payers, and we can carry on with the example of Pacific Blue Cross. So something has to happen in between here for Pacific Blue Cross as a private payer to add it to their formulary. And I also want to note, I didn't type this in, but Pacific Blue Cross is a huge company, and it has many, probably thousands of formularies. Some are available for one company or one sort of plan sponsor, as they're called. And sometimes one plan sponsor, like one company, can have a bunch of different kinds of formularies depending on the position. If it's the CEO of the company, if it's a director of the company, if it's a manager, like there's just different levels, and sometimes they'll have their own different formularies. This is why we have about 100,000 of them. So all to say, the company that makes that drug is going to have negotiated some kind of an agreement with that private payer, Pacific Blue Cross in your example, to get them to add that to their formulary with certain conditions, which are usually private, happen in a discussion just between them, in order for them to sort of recognize it. I think you use the language of having a knowledge of it. So it's past the green stage. It's legally available in Canada, but it's not accessible because it's not affordable. And your plan, or the plan in your example, hasn't added it for the group that has access to that formulary. I hope that makes sense. Antonella is a very sharp mind in this. So if you have additional questions after the webinar, Karen, please don't hesitate to reach out to Antonella. She's smart as a whip in this stuff.
And I can also find the answer for you. So that's probably likely what would happen. But thank you so much. And I think, Rachel, you did a great job of responding to the other question in the chat that Karen had about limits, right? So maximum amounts that some plans will cover. You also mentioned again that their plans vary in their design. And so some great ideas that you said here is that catastrophic plans might be available. These plans sometimes intersect with one another. And that's where Rachel's saying it's really important to maybe look at your circumstances, what your plans criteria are and how they might intersect with your provincial or territorial plans, and where some of that coverage might be able to support some of these out-of-pocket costs. So with that, I want to respect everyone's time and take the opportunity to thank our speakers. Again, we are on the easiest way to find us is just cpn-rcp.com. Please do check out some of the resources that we mentioned if you're interested on our website, and we will be sending out some PDFs with that information there as well, and some of the tips that were talked about tonight. This is, again, a huge topic, so when you're filling out your evaluation, which we graciously ask you to consider doing, please do share with us what part here resonated with you and that you would like some more information on, because this is a huge area and we want to start doing some education where we can, and sharing some of the great resources that Rachel mentioned, and some of the great opportunities Wendy talked about for you to share your experiences with us. So thank you again to everyone for joining. Thank you so much to our speakers and to our live interpreter. With that, we'll end this webinar, and you can find the recording within a week or so on our website. Thank you and good night.
Thanks for hosting, Antonella. Have a great evening, everybody.